Yes, yes, I'd have to go through all the many regrets in my life and
For decades, the world speculated about the truth behind Woody Allen and Diane Keaton's extraordinary relationship, a bond that transcended romance, fame, and time itself. They met as struggling dreamers in New York City, long before Hollywood knew their names. Together they built something rare, a partnership that blurred the lines between art and love, friendship and fate. But when Diane Keaton passed away, Woody Allen, the man who had once written some of his most beautiful words for her, finally broke his silence. And what he revealed left everyone stunned, because it confirmed what fans had always suspected: that Diane Keaton was not just his muse, but the only woman who ever truly understood him. Their story began in the early 1970s, when Woody cast a young, eccentric actress named Diane Keaton in his Broadway play Play It Again, Sam. She wasn't like the others. She was unpredictable, awkward and radiant in a way that made people look twice. Woody once said she lit up the room without trying. That spark turned into collaboration after collaboration. Sleeper, Love and Death, and of course the timeless masterpiece Annie Hall. In Annie Hall, their real connection was captured forever. The humor, the tension, the tenderness. The world saw it as fiction, but those who knew them best said it was the truest reflection of their relationship. It wasn't acting, Diane once said. It was us, just us, the way we were. Over the years, rumors swirled. Were they still in love? Did they ever truly move on? Woody dated others, married, and faced scandals that changed his public image forever. Diane remained private, fiercely loyal, never speaking ill of him even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Their friendship, though unconventional, endured through decades of turmoil and distance. "I could never hate him," she once confessed. "He made me who I am." When news broke of Diane Keaton's passing, Hollywood fell silent. She wasn't just an actress. She was an icon of authenticity, the woman who made awkwardness beautiful and vulnerability powerful. Tributes poured in from all corners of the industry, but one voice was missing. For days, Woody Allen said nothing. The man known for his wit and endless words suddenly had none. Fans wondered if grief had finally silenced him, or if he was choosing once again to keep his emotions hidden. But then, in a rare and emotional statement, Woody spoke. His words weren't rehearsed, nor were they carefully filtered through publicists. They were raw, simple, and heartbreakingly honest. He called Diane the truest person I ever knew, adding, "She saw me when I couldn't see myself. She understood me. Not the director, not the comedian, but the man behind it all." It was a confession that confirmed decades of whispers, that their connection had never been about fame, romance, or ego. It was something far deeper, two creative souls who recognized themselves in each other. In that brief, trembling statement, Woody Allen revealed what so many had long suspected: that Diane Keaton was the love story that defined his life, even if it never fit into the traditional mold. Friends close to Allen said her death shattered him in a way no one had ever seen before. For years, Diane had been the quiet constant in his life, the person who laughed at his jokes when the world turned on him, who reminded him of his humanity when fame distorted everything else. She kept him grounded, one longtime collaborator said. She was his mirror, the only one who reflected back who he truly was. Now, as Woody Allen looks back on a lifetime of art and controversy, one truth stands above all others: that behind every great scene he ever wrote about love, every flawed man and every complicated woman, there was always a little bit of Diane Keaton. And for the first time, after her passing, he admitted it out loud, before Hollywood knew their names, before Annie Hall became a love story for the ages, there were just two awkward dreamers trying to make sense of life: Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. It was 1968 when their paths first crossed during rehearsals for Allen's Broadway play Play It Again, Sam. Diane, still in her 20s, was tall, quirky, and disarmingly honest, the kind of woman who didn't seem to care about impressing anyone. Woody, already known for his neurotic humor and razor-sharp wit, was immediately fascinated. By his own admission, Woody wasn't used to people like Diane. She wasn't intimidated by his intellect or his reputation. She teased him, challenged him, even made him uncomfortable, in the best possible way. She was so unpredictable, Woody later recalled. You never knew what she was going to say or do next. And that's what made her magical. At first, their connection was purely professional. Diane brought a freshness to the stage that no one else could. But behind the scenes, something deeper began to grow. They shared quiet dinners, long walks through New York City, and endless conversations about art, books, and the absurdity of life. It wasn't fireworks. It was curiosity, respect, and a shared sense of humor that slowly evolved into love. When Play It Again, Sam moved to film, Woody had no doubt that Diane was the only one who could bring her character to life. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, natural, unscripted, and full of electricity. We didn't have to act, Diane once said. We just were. What made their relationship so unusual was how untraditional it was. There were no public displays of affection, no romantic declarations. They were quiet, private, and deeply connected in their own way. Woody was shy, analytical, and often lost in his own mind. Diane was spontaneous, open-hearted, and wildly free. They balanced each other perfectly, two opposites orbiting around the same creative sun. But fame has a way of changing everything. As Woody's career as a filmmaker exploded, Diane became his muse, the face of his cinematic universe. Together they made Sleeper, Love and Death, and finally Annie Hall, the film that captured not only their artistic brilliance, but their entire emotional history. In Annie Hall, the world saw the real Woody and Diane, their humor, their tenderness, their misunderstandings. The film wasn't fiction. It was a diary of their relationship told through Woody's eyes and lived through Diane's soul. The clothes she wore, oversized jackets, men's hats, loose ties, weren't costumes. They were hers. Her style, her spirit, her essence. Woody didn't invent Annie Hall. Diane Keaton did. When Annie Hall swept the Oscars in 1978, Diane won Best Actress. As she walked onto the stage in her signature outfit, smiling shyly at the audience, Woody watched from afar. He didn't applaud out of pride alone. He applauded out of love. I was just so happy for her, he later said. It felt like the universe finally noticed what I already knew, that she was extraordinary. Even after their romantic relationship ended, the bond between them never disappeared. Diane remained in Woody's orbit, not as a lover, but as a friend, confidant, and artistic partner. They continued to work together, share dinners, and exchange letters filled with wit and warmth. We stopped being a couple, Diane once said, but we never stopped being us. Those who knew them best often said they were soulmates who simply couldn't exist within the limits of romance. Woody himself admitted it. I wasn't the kind of man who could make her happy in the traditional way. But I loved her, and I always will. Their connection defied labels. It was built on mutual admiration, trust, and an unspoken understanding that what they shared was bigger than love. It was legacy. Diane inspired him to write differently, to see the beauty in imperfection, to create art that was as fragile and funny as real life. In every film Woody made after Annie Hall, there was always a trace of her. A look, a laugh, a line of dialogue that belonged only to Diane Keaton. And though their romantic chapter ended decades ago, the story of their bond never truly closed. Because from that first moment on Broadway, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton weren't just acting in a love story, they were living one that would echo through film history forever. As time passed, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton's relationship began to change, not because of anger or betrayal, but because life itself started pulling them in different directions. Fame had arrived, and with it came the relentless demands of Hollywood, the pressure to stay relevant, and the noise that surrounded every move they made. By the early 1980s, Woody Allen was no longer just a comedian or screenwriter. He was a filmmaker whose every project was treated like an event. Diane Keaton, meanwhile, had become one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, stepping into powerful roles in The Godfather Part 2, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and Reds. Their names were now on everyone's lips. But the simplicity they once shared, the quiet dinners, the private laughter, began to fade into memory. They were still close, but something unspoken lingered between them. Woody once said, "I always knew Diane was going to move ahead of me. She was fearless. She could go anywhere and become anyone." And that's exactly what happened. Diane started exploring roles that challenged her in new ways, working with directors like Warren Beatty and Francis Ford Coppola, while Woody stayed rooted in his own world of New York neurotics and self-reflective comedies. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Woody's world revolved around structure, control, and repetition. Diane thrived on spontaneity, adventure, and reinvention. "He lives in his head," she once joked, "and I live everywhere else." But even as their paths diverged, their connection never broke. Friends often describe their friendship as a love story without the romance. Woody would still send her early drafts of his scripts, seeking her thoughts, and Diane never hesitated to tell him the truth, even when it hurt. "She could make fun of me in a way no one else could," Woody admitted. But she always did it with love. Then came the controversies, the ones that would forever reshape Woody Allen's public image. In the 1990s, as accusations and scandals began to dominate his life, many of his longtime collaborators distanced themselves. Studios hesitated, actors declined to work with him, and the man once seen as Hollywood's genius became a figure of public debate. But Diane Keaton didn't turn her back. While she never defended every detail of his personal life, she refused to condemn him either. Her loyalty, rooted in decades of knowing the man behind the headlines, never wavered. "I believe in Woody," she once told a journalist. "I know who he is, and I know his heart." It wasn't a statement of blind faith. It was one of love and history. For Diane, Woody wasn't a tabloid headline or a courtroom name. He was the man who gave her the chance to shine, who saw her beauty when no one else did, who taught her that awkwardness could be powerful and that imperfection could be art. For Woody, her quiet support during that dark period meant more than any public defense. In private, he called her the bravest person I've ever known. She never sought attention for standing by him. She simply stayed. Years passed. They grew older, more fragile, more aware of time slipping away. Woody continued making films, each one a reflection of a world he could never quite escape. Love lost, memory regret. Diane, meanwhile, wrote books, embraced photography, and found a new passion for preserving old Hollywood homes. Though they lived separate lives, their bond remained untouched by distance. In interviews, Diane often spoke about Woody with a nostalgic smile. "He's impossible," she'd laugh, "but I love him." And Woody, though rarely sentimental, would always return the sentiment in his own way. "She's one of the few people I can't imagine not being around," he once said. "She's part of my DNA." Behind those simple words was a truth few could deny. No matter where life took them, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton were still tied together, by art, by history, and by an understanding that defied explanation. When Diane's health began to decline in her final years, Woody reportedly called her often. They reminisced, laughed about the old days, and spoke about how fast it all went. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about gratitude for the strange, beautiful journey they had shared. And when she was gone, Woody finally said what he'd spent a lifetime avoiding, that Diane Keaton wasn't just his muse or his friend. She was the reason he ever believed in love at all. Even in their early days, there was something about Woody Allen and Diane Keaton's connection that no one could quite define. It wasn't the fiery romance of typical Hollywood couples, nor was it the fragile friendship that fades once the cameras stop rolling. What they shared existed somewhere in between. A deep, unspoken understanding that both of them carried quietly through the decades. To many who worked alongside them, their relationship seemed puzzling. They never fit the mold. There were no dramatic breakups, no bitter feuds, no public betrayals. Instead, they shared an enduring affection that transcended romantic expectation. "Woody and Diane didn't need labels," a producer once said. "They just got each other." In a business built on illusion, that's rare. When Diane was asked about him years later, she never hesitated. "He's my best friend," she said. "He always will be." Her answer wasn't nostalgic. It was certain, steady, as if she were describing a permanent truth. For Diane, Woody Allen represented a constant in a world that changed too quickly. And for Woody, she remained a safe harbor, the one person who knew the man behind the legend. What bound them so tightly was a shared sensibility, a mutual understanding of life's absurdities. Both saw the world through the same lens of humor and melancholy. They could laugh about pain and cry about beauty. Their conversations, friends recalled, could shift from jokes about neurotic filmmakers to reflections on death and meaning in the same breath. They spoke the same emotional language, one close friend said. That's what made them inseparable. Their bond also thrived on contrast. Diane's eccentricity and warmth softened Woody's cynicism. She encouraged him to take risks, to let go, to see joy even in chaos. Woody's structure and intellect grounded her boundless energy. They balanced each other in a way that was almost poetic, like two sides of the same creative coin. Over the years, they became symbols of a kind of love that doesn't fit neatly into categories. They never married, never lived together, and yet they shared an intimacy that many married couples never find. It wasn't about possession. It was about connection. "We didn't need to be together to love each other," Diane once said. "We were part of each other's stories, and that was enough." This truth was reflected in Woody's films time and time again. The women in his stories, flawed, intelligent, endlessly fascinating, were often shaped by his real-life admiration for Diane. Even decades after Annie Hall, echoes of her could be seen in his characters. The nervous laugh, the stubborn optimism, the combination of strength and vulnerability that only she embodied so naturally. But their closeness also came with pain. Woody once admitted that his relationship with Diane was the great what-if of his life, the love that didn't follow the script. "There was something beautiful there," he said in an interview. "But I was too neurotic, too self-involved to make it last in a conventional way. And maybe she was too free to ever be tied down." Diane never disagreed. "We would have driven each other crazy," she laughed in her memoir. But that doesn't mean it wasn't love. It just wasn't the kind you put in a box. Their friendship endured through every storm, fame, scandal, distance, and time. And when Woody finally spoke after Diane's passing, his words revealed how much of her still lived inside him. He said, "Diane was one of those rare people who could make me laugh in the middle of despair. She didn't judge, she just understood. I don't think I'll ever find that again." It was the confession fans had long suspected, that behind all of Woody's cynicism and complexity, Diane Keaton had been the heart he could never let go of. Even when the world turned against him, she remained his silent supporter. Even when their romance faded, her influence endured. And perhaps that's what made their connection so haunting. The idea that true love doesn't always demand permanence. Sometimes it just leaves a mark that time can't erase. For Woody Allen, Diane Keaton wasn't just a chapter of his life. She was the theme that ran through the entire story. And even in death, her presence lingers. In his words, his films, and the fragile honesty she inspired in him. As one friend of the pair said softly after Diane's funeral, "They were never really apart. Not then, not now." When news of Diane Keaton's passing broke, the world stopped for a moment. It wasn't just another Hollywood headline. It was the end of an era, the closing chapter of a love story that had quietly shaped modern cinema and touched millions. Across social media, tributes poured in from actors, directors, and fans who had grown up watching her on screen. That unmistakable laugh, that quirky charm, that fearless honesty. But among all the voices remembering her, there was one everyone was waiting to hear: Woody Allen's. For days, he remained silent. Those closest to him said he was devastated, lost in a fog of memories that stretched back more than 5 decades. His apartment, once a place of creative energy, grew still. He was seen walking alone through Central Park, the same park they had strolled together during their early years in New York. "He looked like a man talking to ghosts," one witness said softly. Finally, a week later, Woody released a statement, not through a publicist or a press conference, but through a handwritten letter that was later shared by a close friend. The note was simple, elegant, and heartbreakingly personal. "Diane was my compass," he wrote. "She was the reason my characters had hearts. She showed me that humor could live beside sadness, that love could survive misunderstanding, and that imperfection could be beautiful. I loved her, in every way a person can love another. And I'll miss her until my last day." It was a confession decades in the making. For a man who had spent his career avoiding public vulnerability, this was the first time Woody Allen stripped away his defenses. He admitted what many had always suspected, that Diane Keaton was not only his muse, but the emotional foundation of his life's work. After her funeral, which was a quiet, private ceremony attended by family and a few longtime friends, Woody reportedly stayed long after everyone else had left. He sat by her photo, motionless, eyes lowered, as if the weight of 50 years had finally caught up to him. One guest later said, "He didn't speak much, but you could feel it. He was saying goodbye to the only person who ever truly knew him." In the months that followed, Woody was rarely seen in public. He declined interviews and paused all film projects. For a man who had always filled his time with work, the silence was telling. Those close to him said he had started writing again, not a screenplay this time, but a memoir, one that would finally tell his side of the story. "It's not about scandal," a friend shared. "It's about Diane, their friendship, their love, the years that shaped them both." When asked once what made Diane different from every other woman he had known, Woody smiled faintly and said, "She never wanted anything from me. She just wanted me to be myself. And somehow, that made me want to be better." It was this selfless love that defined their bond, a connection not based on what they could gain, but on what they gave each other. Diane gave Woody laughter, warmth, and freedom. Woody gave Diane a space to shine, to create, to be unapologetically herself. Together, they built a legacy that blurred the lines between art and reality. In one of his final interviews before her passing, Woody reflected on Annie Hall and how it changed his life. "That film was a piece of us," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever written anything that true since. Because you can't recreate truth. You can only live it once." Now, with Diane gone, the truth remains in the films they made together. Those moments frozen in time, filled with laughter, awkward pauses, and the subtle ache of love that never truly fades. When you watch Annie Hall today, knowing what we know now, every glance, every smile, every unfinished sentence feels different, more real, more human. Because behind the camera's frame was a man and woman who weren't just acting, but remembering. In the end, Woody Allen's final words about Diane Keaton summed up their entire story. "She was the beginning of everything good in my life. The rest was just trying to live up to her." And perhaps that's what we all suspected. That, in a career filled with brilliance and controversy, Woody Allen's greatest masterpiece wasn't a film at all. It was Diane Keaton,